This is the easier-to-read version of 1984 by George Orwell, retold and narrated by Sarah Simpson. Part 1, Chapter 5. The cafeteria at Winston's work was noisy and smelled bad. The only thing that smelled worse than the stink of the food was the stink of the gin, which employees could buy at the bar for 10 cents a cup. "Winston, I was looking for you." Winston turned around and saw his friend Sim. Friend wasn't exactly the right word, Winston decided. Nobody had actual friends anymore. Friendships could get you into trouble because you never knew when you'd say the wrong thing and end up getting arrested. People turned their friends into the police all the time. Winston decided Sim was a coworker, but he was a coworker that he liked more than most of them. Sim worked in the research department. His job was writing the latest dictionary for the government's special language, Newspeak. "Do you have any razor blades?" Sim asked Winston. "I've been shaving with the same one for weeks and it's starting to hurt my face. I've been to every store and none of them have any." "No, I don't have any," Winston said quickly. "I've been using the same one for 6 weeks." Winston was lying. He actually had 2 razor blades that he'd saved just in case they became hard to get at the store, but he didn't want to share them with Sim. There was always some necessity in short supply at the stores. Sometimes you couldn't get buttons for fixing your shirts. Sometimes you couldn't get shoelaces. Right now, it was razor blades for shaving. Winston and Sim got their trays of food. The meal consisted of a soupy goo, a piece of bread, a small piece of cheese, and plain black coffee. Next, they stopped by the bar to get a cup of gin. They sat down at one of the sticky metal tables and began to eat. Winston was so hungry he was able to put the goo in his mouth without gagging, which was unusual. "Did you watch the prisoners getting hanged yesterday?" Sim asked Winston. Winston had forgotten how much Sim liked to watch executions, then talk about them over lunch. Winston didn't like to watch the executions or talk about them. He gulped down his gin. It burned his mouth and eyes. "No, I was busy yesterday," Winston said, "but I'll be able to see them on telescreen." "TV isn't nearly as good," Sim said. Winston changed the subject. "So, how's work?" he asked Sim. "Slow, but making progress," Sim said. "I'm still working on the Newspeak dictionary. I'm working on the adjectives now." Winston breathed a sigh of relief. He had gotten Sim changed to a less horrible topic while they ate. "This is the 11th version of the dictionary, isn't it?" Winston asked. "Yes," Sim said, "but this will be the last one we'll need for a long, long time. You have no idea how difficult the work is. You probably think we spend most of our time making up new words, but that isn't what we do at all." "What do you do?" Winston asked. "We get rid of words," Sim said, smiling. "We're getting rid of hundreds and hundreds of unnecessary words every day. Once we're done, language will be so much clearer. Here's an example. Look at the word good. If we have the word good, why do we need the word bad? Wouldn't it be easier just to say ungood? If something is very good, right now we use words like excellent and splendid, but we don't need all those complicated words. It would make it so much more sensible just to say plus good or double plus good. It will be so much more efficient. It was all Big Brother's idea, of course." "Of course," Winston agreed. "Newspeak is an amazing language," Sim gushed. "Did you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world that gets smaller every year? Just think of how wonderful it will be when our language is so simple. Without so many different, complicated words all describing different versions of the same thing, the world will be much less confusing. So much thought crime will be avoided once people have fewer words for describing their thoughts." "What about the proles?" Winston asked. "How will you teach them to use fewer words? Won't that be difficult?" Sim snorted and looked disgusted. "Proles," he spat. "Who cares about them? They don't matter. Don't worry about them. Party members. That's who I'm talking about. That's who matters. Just think, by 2050, no party member will have ever had to read Shakespeare or any of those other terrible, old, confusing writers who stir up so many thought crimes. Life will be clear and simple. Life will be so much better. People won't even have to think at all." As Winston listened to Sim, he realized that Sim was too smart for his own good. Someday, Sim would just disappear, and no one would ever talk about him again. A man at the next table was talking very loudly. Winston knew it had to be something about Big Brother or thought crimes or something, but he honestly couldn't understand most of what the man was saying. To Winston, it just sounded like a big annoying duck, quacking and quacking just to hear itself quack. It was very irritating. Duck speak, Winston thought. That's what I'd call that guy's words. A girl was speaking too, but Mr. Duckspeak didn't stop talking even when she was saying something. He doesn't listen, Winston thought. Winston thought he recognized the girl's voice, but he didn't want to turn around and see who she was. That was the sort of thing that could cause a problem, and Winston wasn't the sort of person who liked to draw attention to himself. "Hello, hello!" a man's voice boomed. Parsons was Winston's neighbor and another party member who worked in the Ministry of Truth. He sat down. Sim looked annoyed. Sim thought Parsons was big, loud, sweaty, and stupid. Sim didn't like it when Parsons sat with them at lunch. He pulled up a chair next to Sim. "You forgot to give me the money for the Hate Week fund," Parsons said to Sim. "I did?" Sim asked, genuinely confused. His confusion wasn't surprising. 25% of every person's paycheck had to be donated to some group within the party, and it was hard to keep track of who was collecting money for what reason in any given week. "By the way," Parsons said, smiling, "I'm sorry my little boy hit you with a rock from his catapult yesterday when you were in the apartment, Winston. I told him if he hits anyone with his catapult again, I'm going to take it away." "I think he was upset because he didn't get to go to the execution," Winston said uncomfortably. "I told him that was no excuse," Parsons said earnestly. "But at least he's smart enough to understand what's really important, right? Both of my kids are naughty, always getting into trouble, but they're both very good at knowing when someone's breaking the law. They know it's important to be sure to get people punished when they do something that might hurt Big Brother or Oceania. Let me tell you the cutest story about my little girl. When she was on a hike with her spies troop in the woods last week, she and a couple of the other girls sneaked away from the group. They saw a man who they were sure was up to no good, so they followed him all afternoon, then reported him to the police. Want to know how they knew something was wrong? The man's shoes. They noticed his shoes were different from the usual shoes, so they knew he had to be a Eurasian spy. And she's only 7! Can you believe how smart she is?" "What happened to the man?" Winston asked uncomfortably. "The man?" Parsons said. "Oh, I'm sure the police shot him, of course, thanks to my clever little girl." "Good," Syme said. "I guess you can't be too careful," Winston said uneasily. The telescreen interrupted their conversation. "Comrades!" the young, happy voice on the screen cried. "This is a special news story. I am here to share wonderful news with all of you. As of this morning, the country's factories met their goal to increase production to the point where the needs of all of Oceania's citizens can be met. There is plenty of everything for everyone now. The workers in the factories were so happy that they marched out into the streets, carrying signs thanking Big Brother for their prosperity. Congratulations to all of you on your new happy lives." "What about razors?" Winston thought. He knew better than to say it out loud. The news was always coming on with stories like this. None of the stories really made any sense if you stopped to think about it. For example, one day Big Brother might tell everyone in Oceania that their chocolate ration was being reduced by 2 grams. The very next day, Big Brother would come on, making an announcement that the chocolate ration was being increased by 1 gram. Winston understood a little math, and it was obvious to him that what Big Brother was doing. It was still a gram less than they were getting the week before. Most citizens were just too stupid to notice. He looked around the cafeteria at all the happy faces. Idiots. Winston had never lived under better circumstances, but the older he got, the harder it was for him to put up with all the misery. He was tired of disgusting food. He was tired of always being hungry. He was tired of his clothes being dirty and having holes in all his socks. He was tired of living in buildings that were always cold in the winter. Surely life hadn't always been this miserable. If life had always been like this, why would the human race even want to keep existing? What was the point of living if life was this bad? Winston looked around the cafeteria at the sick, dirty people. They were ugly. Their bodies were run down from hard work, bad food, and lack of medical care. Their clothes were worn out and dirty. If you looked at Oceania's posters and TV shows, you would think that everyone in the country was tall, tan, blonde, and healthy. What a joke. Parsons looked delighted. "Wow," Parsons said, "the Ministry of Plenty has done a great job this year." "Yes," Winston said flatly. "Do you happen to have any extra razors, Winston?" Parson asked. So much for all the plenty, Winston thought. "No," Winston replied. "I've been using the same razor for myself for the past 6 weeks, sorry." The loud man was still quacking at the next table. The sound was giving Winston a headache. But what did it matter? Someday they'd all be dead, killed by the thought police. Sim would be dead, Winston too. People like Parsons would never be killed. Mrs. Parsons and her bratty children would live too. Idiots like them were the backbone of Oceania. They were perfect, unthinking, blindly obeying citizens. The girl with the dark hair who worked in the fiction department would never be killed either. She was a perfect citizen too. Just then Winston looked over at the table where the loud man was still quacking. The girl with the dark hair was sitting there and she was looking right at Winston. They stared right at one another for a second, then both of them quickly looked away. Winston started to sweat. His first response was terror, but that faded into anxiety. Why was she looking at him? Why was she always following him? Everywhere he went, it seemed like the girl with the dark hair was there. Was she spying on him? Did she suspect him of a thought crime? Did she somehow know about the secret diary back at his apartment? Maybe she'd been watching his face when she sat behind him during the 2 minutes hate and saw that he wasn't enjoying it. Maybe his face had looked bored and unhappy, and she was going to tell the thought police. He would be convicted of a face crime and shot. The girl had turned away from Winston. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Maybe it had all been a coincidence. He needed to relax. Parsons was talking again. "Did I ever tell you about the time my little boy lit that old woman's skirt on fire? My boy saw her wrapping up sausages at the market using a poster with Big Brother's face on it, so he picked up a lighter and set her dress on fire. Served her right. She got some nasty burns. Maybe she'll think twice before disrespecting our leader again. I couldn't have been more proud of my boy than I was that day." The telescreen let out a loud whistle, making Winston jump. It was time to go back to work.